Can I ask everybody just for a moment to go to Michael Bruntz's Twitter page? I know Ravi's there. I'm there right now. I'd like to look at his most recent post and talk about that circle that he drew last night, because it looks like a mole that should get removed and not much of an actual circle.
That's okay.
Bruntzy, what happened there? Was that something like your kids did, or was that you?
No, you're getting the kids to bed. You got kids hanging all over you. I was actually pretty pleased with that effort on the circle. It's about as good as I could do.
I actually don't think it's that bad. What I do think is bad is the thing that is actually circled there, which is the 8 free throw shot by Northwestern yesterday and the 46 free throw shot by Purdue. Bruntz, unless I'm watching like UConn against Butler, which is one of the fewest fouling teams in the country in Butler and the most disgusting team in the country in UConn in terms of how they play basketball, that number never makes sense to me. Like 46-8, I can't imagine a world in which that game was called correctly.
No. Well, no, and I hadn't been watching it, and then like all these people like, oh, Collins is going crazy right now, like, and I was like, oh, I wonder what he's so pissed off about. And then I looked at the box score, and I was like, oh, that's it. That's what he's really mad about. It's insane. I get that you probably have to. I think maybe as an official, you're probably calling Purdue differently, given Edey and how big he is and all that stuff. But good night. I mean, that kind of a disparity is just like it's inexplainable. I mean, you just
and inexcusable, right? I mean, like that's you're not calling a fair game at that point.
No, I mean, and I mean that game went to overtime, and if you're Northwestern, you're like, what do we have to do to win this game here? I don't blame him for going crazy. I give him credit for basically like holding it in for as long as he did, like that. It's somebody replied to my post, and it was almost similar to like the Nebraska NCAA tournament game against Baylor, where there was that huge disparity. And I mean, Tim Miles got run from that too. So, it happens, but geez, I mean, that's, I don't know. I mean, I get that you're maybe looking at things a little bit differently because of who's on the floor. You shouldn't do that, but good God, that was bad.
I mean, first of all, if I was Chris Collins, I wouldn't have just gotten ejected. I probably would have gotten arrested in that situation because of what was happening
earlier in the game, right?
Yeah, no, like first half probably. Like I am not like I keep my cool pretty well. I do not have the emotional maturity to not lose my ever-loving mind in that situation.
Hey, kudos to him though for shaking Painter's hand after the game, and then Edey, he still did the right thing.
No, I mean, listen, he's a good coach and he seems like a decent dude. It kind of reminded me of, and this is totally bizarre, I think it was the Nebraska Texas A&M football game where the penalties were like 17-1. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah.
That's sort of the vibe I got. And, I probably would have reacted closer to how Bo Pelini did in that game than I did Chris Collins, where I thought Bo might either kill someone or have a heart attack during that game.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good comparison across sports there. I mean, it's, you're one of those situations where you're basically helpless. Like what can you possibly do in that moment as a coach to, change the way the game is being called? I mean, it's just, it's bad. I can't remember a game that was just that egregious in quite a while.
Bruntzy.
That's why they made that call.
I mean, you're right. I mean, it's definitely the only game where you can actually look at the box score and then be like, yeah, I pretty much can tell how this game went down.
What's going on.
It's here. I know what happened here.
That's a bunch of BS.
All right, Bruntzy, let's talk a little Nebraska football here before our time runs out. We opened the show kind of completely on a different topic than what we wanted to start the show with. And we talked about pancaking and then the offensive line. And, 2 years ago, we laughed about this Nebraska offensive line. Then last year, I think most people walked away saying, that's pretty good. So for 2024, Michael Mazuka joins the show. Guys are back. Recruits may or may not be developed. We'll see after the spring. How much of a step forward do you expect that group to take again?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an arrow up group right now, and I think when you look at just the number of starts that they have coming back, I mean, that's not the end all be all for how good a position group's going to be, but it definitely helps, and especially when you're on a line position. I think, you have to be able to show that you can move the ball a little bit more consistently on the ground. I mean, that to me would be a significant sign of progress for that group. It looked a lot better last year. I think you saw development in guys that I think a lot of fans and probably media too felt like, the book had kind of been written on, like a Bryce Benhart. And he looked really good last year and better than he had at any point during his Nebraska career. I mean, I think a lot of people probably rolled their eyes a little bit when, Matt Rule says, yeah, Bryce Benhart's an NFL player in my mind. And, he's trending better, and it feels like there's still, very bright days ahead for him. And you add Mazuka, who's started at both guard spots at various Power 5 schools. Ben Scott really kind of solidified that center spot last year. I mean, you got to figure out the other guard spot a little bit and kind of how you're going to work that. But I mean, I think you've got a solid at least 5 or 6 guys right now in that offensive line. And oh, by the way, you still have, Sam Sledge, who's a promising redshirt freshman, Gunnar Gatula, who was on the 2 deep. Sledge was too last season. So it's been, the remake there, I think has been pretty notable, and they've done a good job of recruiting in the 24 class with it. And, some of those young guys are going to have to come in and play earlier than maybe what's expected, going into next season in 25. But I think they've done a good job. I mean, this time last year, Nebraska had 12 offensive linemen available in spring ball,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're pushing 20, and you've got some veterans and guys that you really feel good about. So I think that's a good group to, I think, kind of circle if you're talking about development year one of Matt Rule's staff.
Bruntz, okay, before I ask a real football question here, so Andrew said pancaking, and it reminded me we talked about pancakes to start the show. You remember the Pancake Man, right? I'm not crazy.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because no one would back me up. Andrew didn't grow up here. Nobody in the chat backed me up. But it was like a big deal when the Pancake Man came to school.
He was like the Michael Jordan of like mid '90s school fundraisers. Like
that's what I'm saying. He was a big deal.
I think he's still around too. Like I think he's still kicking it. So but yeah, he had like this huge. He'd have like a huge griddle. He had some kind of contraption that like would drop the pancakes in perfect spacing.
The batter. Yep.
Yeah, he'd flip them. Like if he picked you to go out there and catch a few that he'd flip, it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, like a hibachi grill. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Hey, all I'm saying is I'm happy that somebody can back up this story now.
Yeah. See, he was looking at me like I was a crazy person.
Not that you were crazy that an actual guy that served pancakes at the school, but like at first when you brought that up, I'm like, man, like hopefully like this is like an okay thing.
I told him it was like pretzel day in the office. It was a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd usually be there on like Saturday morning at school eating pancakes.
Absolutely. It was incredible.
See, I wish I had a Pancake Man.
See, the Pancake Man was the GOAT. So back to actual football questions here, Bruntz. You kind of put together a list of in-state recruits and targets in the upcoming classes for Nebraska. One that there's been some whisperings about recently is Pierce Newberry from Millard North. It seems like the general consensus is he's going to end up in Nebraska's class sooner rather than later. What do you know about that situation, or anybody else from that list that you put together that's of note?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the missing piece for Newberry for a long time was just making sure that he got that offer.
Yeah.
And, I think kind of given his skill set and kind of if you project out what he can be, 2-3 years from now with some college strength and conditioning work. I mean, I think he's a really intriguing defensive piece. And, he's a Nebraska legacy. His dad played at Nebraska. I know the program means a lot to he and his family. And, So I think, once Nebraska made that offer, they've done a really nice job of kind of getting in there and recruiting him hard. He's been down to Lincoln already since the offer. And, it helps when you've got, a close friend and high school teammate that's already committed to Nebraska and in his ear every day about getting to Lincoln and being part of that class. So, I think beyond him and kind of talking about, that list of guys, I mean, I think, again, you're seeing Nebraska really making a concerted effort to build their class around local talent. And the offers, I think, really reflect that. And, I think it's a smart way to go about things. I think we've talked about it, on your show before, that I think that you are kind of coming into this thing, if you're Matt Rule, at a really good time for Nebraska in-state talent. And I think Nebraska's done a good job of recognizing that and building those relationships. So I'm intrigued to kind of see what happens, with 2026 offers. You've seen a few more of those go out, a little bit more interest for some local prospects there. But yeah, I mean, I think it's, again, in 25 going to be a class, but there's going to be a lot of Nebraska flavor when signing day comes next December.
Bruntz, one of the two most probably highly touted guys in this class, you've got Christian Jones, obviously from Westside, a top 100 player, but a guy that has been raking in a ton of offers, seemingly maybe the position that Nebraska high schools pump out the most effectively is tight end. And you've got another good one in Chase Lofton. He's picked up some huge offers this offseason. Florida State, Auburn, Miami, Texas A&M, Arkansas. I mean, you're talking about big-time football programs here. Any idea where Nebraska sits with him? I know they were in on him early, but with, it almost feels like we have sort of a Carter Nelson situation here in terms of some of the other players that are going to be in the mix for Chase Lofton.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nebraska got in early, which I think was smart. I think, you kind of start looking at visits and where he's been. I mean, I think pretty much every opportunity that there's been for him to get to Nebraska for an event, he's been there. And I think that's a positive thing. I mean, I think, as much as you talk about everything in recruiting, I mean, you just kind of follow the visits. And I think that's a pretty good kind of barometer of where things stand. I think Chase Lofton is going to take visits. He absolutely should, given the way that his recruitment's blown up over the last couple months. But, I think Nebraska's in a good spot there. And I think it helps too when you have somebody that's, kind of similar skill set, similar size, that kind of stuff, and in a Carter Nelson, to where if you can kind of feature him, I think that helps. And you kind of joke about it, but I mean, Nebraska, the state has kind of become like the cradle of tight ends almost. I mean, Nebraska's just like pumping out 6'4", 225-pound high school guys that can run and catch. Like, I mean, consider. I mean,
it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, you've got Miami flying halfway across the country to Nebraska to recruit tight ends. I mean, that tells you just the level of talent that's there. So, but I think with Lofton, I mean, I think it's going to be, a recruitment that kind of, drags on, and as it should. That happens whenever you have a national recruit like that. But I think Nebraska is in a good spot because, I think they're not only, offering early, but they're recruiting him hard. Like he's not just a local kid that they can kind of count in their class already.
It's Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7. Good stuff today. I do think we might need to revisit Bill Murray's greatest film list at some point, but that feels like a summer conversation. Bruntz, we appreciate your time as always.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
See you, Bruntsy.
That's Michael Bruntz from Husker 24/7 on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline. Coming up next, we've got more Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln.